So the second part of this session, we are going to welcome along some of our, here they come, popping up on the screen, some of our CEOs from the Energy Leaders Coalition. And I know I've touched on it a couple of times this morning, but for those that aren't aware, the Energy Leaders Coalition was established in May 2018. So all wrapped up in the first of the conferences, actually, by powerful women, and part of the reason that we came together was that we were just very frustrated about the lack of progress that was being made, as were our colleagues in BEIS. So we put our heads together and said, look, how can we try and be more effective? How can we accelerate this transition and increase and improve the balance of diversity and creation of inclusive cultures by coming together and trying to use the sort of the power of the sum of the parts. So the Energy Leaders Coalition was born with 8 members originally, and I've got some of those with me this morning. And more recently, this year, we've been joined by a further 6 companies. So we now have leaders that represent organisations with employees that are more than half of the UK energy sector workforce, astoundingly, which is fantastic progress that's been made. And the latest to join the group include BP, Drax, Engie, E.ON UK, Subsea 7 and Wood. And between us, we are now working and starting, in effect, our 3rd year of work together. And today, you heard earlier, was mentioned the launch of the 2nd anniversary report. So you won't have had a great deal of chance to wade through that yet and enjoy the read. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just sharing some of the examples and stories of success that have been had from listening to the leaders that we've got on the panel today. And we're also going to talk about some of the challenges that we still see ahead too, because this is by no means done and dusted. There's still an awful lot to do. And there's a lot of humility about the conversations that we have as the Energy Leaders Coalition. And as you heard from John there, a real sense of let's get practical and let's work together and learn from each other to make good progress. So I'm delighted to welcome onto the panel this morning for you to hear from. We have got Sinead Lynch, who is the UK country chair of Shell. And Sinead, before being in this role, had an illustrious career with BG and led the BG team integration team when Shell and BG came together. And since then, she has been in her current position. We've got Alistair Phillips-Davies, who is CEO of SSE. Alistair has been a long time at SSE since 1997, working his way through a variety of roles inside the business. So he knows this company inside out, back to front, and now has the pleasure of leading it and has done since 2013. We are also joined by Tom Glover. Tom is the UK country chair for RWE and the chief commercial officer and executive board member for RWE Renewables. It's a big and very complicated company. He'll probably touch on some of that, but he has a wide range of responsibilities in terms of optimization of the global renewable portfolio, as well as obviously the role of UK country chair and member of the ELC. We're also joined by Juliette Davenport, who is founder and chief executive of Good Energy, a renewable energy company with a mission to power a green us all as customers. And Juliette's described as an innovator and a disruptor and somebody who likes to have some very straight conversation about the challenges and the opportunities that we had. So always great to have as part of our conversation. And she was recognised for all of her work and efforts with an OBE for services to renewables back in 2013. Juliette also I have the privilege of working with as the Vice President of the Energy Institute. And then we have Will Gardner, who's the CEO of Drax Group. He was formerly the CFO and is now running the business, appointed in 2018, with a vision that Drax is firmly focused on enabling a zero carbon, lower cost energy future for us all. And obviously negative carbon emissions is something that Drax has been taking very seriously and putting into practice. So welcome to all of you. It's great to have you all on the panel this morning. I know you've all got sort of stories that you've told in the report, so I'd quite like to just give you all a few minutes to touch on those and reflect on those and thinking about the achievements that you've had inside your organisations. And then once we've done that, we'll come back round on some of the challenges, if we may, and kick a few questions around. So Alistair, you're on screen. How about we start with you?
All right, I thought I was going last given my billing on there, so given I spent 40 minutes trying to make the IT work, teach me to go into the office, but in Scotland we're under a bit more pressure to try and not go into the office, but anyway, fine. I haven't had a chance to read the report, but fortunately Rosie, our lead on this, managed to pull a few of the things out, so delighted to go. I'll try not to take too much time. Look, three things that I'd probably call out which apply to us. One of them on targets, and we talked a bit earlier about targets when we had our powerful women, the leader session before this. One of them was looking at roles where over £40,000 in our organisation, that was back in 2014 money as well, where women were involved, and we were a fairly terrible 10 to 11% back then. We set a target of getting to at least 25% by 2025. We're pretty close to that as of March 2020, so we're at just over 23%, which is a positive. And we need, there's more work to be done on that. So I think that's one of the things that we're pleased about, but equally thinking about upping that target will no doubt be on Rosie's list, and should be pleased to hear me say that here publicly and be back getting into the Exco and board about that, I'm sure. On case studies and things like that, how we reduced the number of non-returners from maternity leave from 16% to 4%, basically. So I know we've done a lot of things around flexible working, maybe not as much as COVID has done to flexible working, in all fairness, but we did a lot there, and I think that's helped us hugely make sure that we offer some sort of career to as many people as possible, particularly because they're often some of the most talented individuals and particularly brilliant at juggling things. And I just call out one area. We a few years ago we won an award for having the best returner in Ireland. There was a lady who's number 2 in IT, came back straight into the number 1 job because her boss had left in the meantime. And that was a great thing to do. And Claire's gone from strength to strength, and not too long after that, she's now leading the whole Irish business for us as well. So I think hopefully we can be proud of having taken that bold step then, and then found ourselves a leader for a business unit with a P&L as well. And then finally, I think for us, leadership and targets and things like that, using consistent frameworks for measuring process is something that we call out. I think there's an ongoing challenge we and other companies have in encouraging people to share their data so we can get accurate views of what's really going on. We're trying to showcase I&D stats. I think actually in there somewhere this time around for our graduate recruitment program, 39% of graduate applicants this year identified as being Black, Asian, minority ethnic across 7,000 applicants, which was great to have so many, but it just threw up challenges going forward for us as well. There's only 12% of the people who got final offers were in that category. So we had fairly big dropout. When we go through the data, there's 1 or 2 particular segments that have dropout. So although we call that some good practice, and it's great, and John mentioned it in the session earlier, to have a few competitions amongst ourselves. There's probably the alpha males amongst us trying to do better. You've all worked out that you want to get us competing on these things. I still think we obviously have issues that we have to go around in terms of that. So we were fantastically encouraged by the level of applicants we got at 39%, but clearly massively disappointed that only less than a third of that level actually made it through into the final job offers. So still, despite the fact there's some positives there, I think there's a lot to do. There's lots of things that we've called out. You set out earlier in our meeting, and it's I think it's page 44 and 45 of the report, the work that we're looking to do in 2021. And you continue to challenge us on how we're going to show real visible leadership as well. So I think that's important. So pleased to be in the report, but I think as I'm sure we'll hear from you and others, lots more to do. And that one was a clear example. But we're pleased that we're making progress on data.
Fantastic, and I knew you'd want to talk about the numbers, which is and it is important, and as you heard, John reflected on it too. And you're right. I think the challenge around sustaining the effort and the pace of the effort and monitoring the impact is a real biggie. and we got some questions. The chat is getting very busy, so I'll whiz on to our next speaker and invite Juliet, if I may, to share some of her thoughts. Morning, Juliet.
Good morning, Louise. How are you?
Good, thanks. You?
Good, thank you. So thank you for inviting me on to kind of share some thoughts about this. I was actually listening to John talking earlier, and I thought the comment about support and home support is so important in this, and I think COVID has really brought that forward. And actually, I was listening to Caitlin Moran the other day on her new book, and one of the things she pulled out is that you marry your glass ceiling. Which I thought was it's quite punchy, a little bit punchier than probably we were talking about, but I do think that's quite an important point. And I think COVID has seen that come out even more. Is obviously the stress that we've put on households where there are children in the household, where people are trying to home educate, has been really powerful during this time. And one of the things that we pull out in the report is kind of recognizing that quite often a lot of the caring does fall on women's shoulders unless they do share the childcare properly. And if you're both at home, how have we coped? So we did a lot of work with the teams, both consulting with the teams, but also trying to find out what people needed during the COVID time so that we didn't undermine the capability of our female workforce to actually work. So we put a lot of flexibility. Everybody could work from home immediately, obviously, that was a given almost. But we also gave an extra week's holiday so people could take time and really flexibility. So you could take an hour a day, or you could take 1 day a week, just so that you could have that extra time to deal with what's going on. And I used it actually personally, because I found it very important to be able to set yourself up to perform properly during that time. So, and I think that is the point, is that we've seen some decisions, I would say, by government that if they'd had more women in their senior leadership team, they might have thought about things differently. And I think having women in senior places is incredibly important for the rest of the workforce, because you design, particularly things like responding to COVID or any kind of policy within the organisation, you've always got that thoughtfulness coming through. I mean, as an organisation, we've measured diversity for quite a long time, and I can't remember, Louise, whether I told you a story. I put quite a few noses out when I first started asking for some data, because people got really upset because they thought I was saying that they were doing something wrong, and the answer was, coming back to John's point again, is unless you measure something, you don't know what's going on. And I think it's incredibly important, the measurement. If we can, the more we measure, the more we understand. I mean, we're a much smaller organisation than a lot of the other guys talking. So at our senior level, at least, it's very obvious where we've got gaps and we haven't. And actually, at our board level and our director level, we have got 50-50 in terms of women. But I have to say, I think that's relatively easy, because I think when women get good, they're very good. So appointing very senior women is easier. I think where we've struggled is in our senior leadership team. That's definitely where growing people up through the organisation. And a lot of the time, sort of, again, it comes back to the original STEM pieces. How many women have we got coming through in STEM? And IT is becoming such an important part of our industry going forwards. That's going to hold us back as well, because everything's going to be data-led. Everything's going to be based around smart systems. So I think we're facing into a world where this is just going to be at least as difficult or more difficult to get that level of diversity coming through. And I think one of the things for us is, obviously we've tried to look after the existing workforce during COVID, but I definitely feel that we've kind of slightly fallen back on some of the things that I actually are really looking forward to doing, which is working with some of our more junior women to help them with their leadership capability and really growing internally rather than always trying to just hire externally. Really growing that younger team, not at the heads level, slightly below, to really understand what do they need, what steps do they need to take. And I think it's fine to say, be confident to take a role, but I think you need somebody to bounce that off. I think that it is really hard to build that confidence if you don't have it personally. So I think it's, how do we give those sort of younger women particularly confidence to take their next steps without them feeling uncomfortable. And I think one of the other things, somebody lent me a book, something called Radical Candor, which really helped me with my leadership style, because I think a lot of women are frightened that they need to become like men to be leaders. And the point is, we want diversity. We don't want women just being like men, because the whole point is we want both at a senior leadership level, because that really helps organizations. And so I think trying to figure out how you want to have your own leadership style as a woman, that you don't actually have to look like the person next to you who happens to be a man. You can look like yourself. And I think working through with that, whether that's with your coach, your mentoring, your leadership team internally in your organization, that's a really important part of future leadership for women.
I think women being women is a great place to finish that one. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. But you're right. And the point about confidence, I think, is important, because even people who come across as confident quite often are not. They've just mastered how to do that, but they'll have the same insecurities and wobbles and worries as many others do. So, and that's another responsibility we all have as leaders, isn't it? To try and, make everyone know that that's okay. And there's plenty of ways to deal with it and grow. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Juliet. We will come back. There are some questions about role models and various other things popping up in the chat box, so I'll be back to you on that. Tom, let me invite you to come up next. Some thoughts from you.
Thanks. It's difficult to go after Juliet, isn't it? Because she's got so much passion and energy. I feel like I'm going to let everybody down. So thanks, Juliet. You are great to listen to. So I'll be very quick, because these themes are they're going to be the same across almost everything I've listened to. So I think what really works and makes a difference, I mean, people have talked about this purpose. The biggest thing that's making a difference at RWE at the moment is changing from, let's say, a high emitter in the energy industry to having a purpose to get to net zero by 2040. That actually inspires a lot of people to join our company from all kinds of diverse backgrounds. So having that purpose as a company, that makes a really top-down difference. I think role modeling, and there's one of the questions that's coming through around women on the executive committee. So we're very proud in our renewables business to have 50% and have those in, and John talked about operational roles. So 2 out of our 3 COOs are female, and the CEO is. So actually it's the males like myself in the functional roles, which is really great to see. And across our business, we take a lot of time role modeling our female board levels. But the problem is, and Juliet kind of mentioned it, actually our biggest disappointment recently was, despite getting 50% of executives of female on our renewable board, at our senior management, we really struggled. So I think we're down at like 20% at the next level down, which is really disappointing when you are creating a new company. So that's something that we really need to work on RWE. Working, that really helps, and obviously COVID has accelerated that. And we did have lots of pockets across our business that were doing great agile and flexible working, and lots of resistance, particularly actually at board level, about the effectiveness. And the one good thing about COVID is actually nobody can now say flexible working isn't working. So I think that's a real good boost. And then the specific point that we cover in our kind of case studies in the report released today, it was about de-biasing and really de-biasing all our processes. So whether that be recruitment, whether it be how we resource teams, how we recruit, that's making a big difference to kind of open people up and challenge them about their biases. So that's what's working. What needs to be cracked, and it's quite interesting when I got the briefing for this, some of the horrible statistics that you get from the company. So the one that came from my son, which I think is the interesting one. So it's about STEM at a young age. So he's just started his A-levels. There's about 40 in his maths and physics classes. Yeah, 2 females. Right, so that's 5%. Right, so I mean, and this is in a very middle class tight area. I mean, it's shocking. How do we expect to get to high percentages when we're at 5% at that level? I mean, that's really shocking. I think females in traditionally male-dominated roles. So one statistic my renewables colleagues gave me is, for our applications for offshore wind apprenticeships, only 3% came from females. So even at the application level, 3%. Yeah, and yet, as an industry, our offshore wind industry target is to get to 33% offshore roles by 2030, but we're getting 3% in at the application level. So as much as we also, I think John talked about it, and also Alistair, about getting to 50%, we've managed to get to 50% apprenticeships female, but actually a lot of them are in the functional roles. So we've got a lot in IT, we've got a lot in HR, we've got a lot in accounting and finance, but we're really struggling to get those into our technical apprenticeships. Yeah, and the final thing in a very traditional company like RWE is culture. So we still have pockets where, you know, there is a very male-dominated, they like to call it banter, but I think it's not. And that actually takes a while to change the culture. And actually that's one where that will change a lot of actually just increasing the percentage of females in the workforce, and it'll be becoming unacceptable. So that's the final bit, which we're finding quite hard to root out. Yeah, so hopefully that helps.
That's great, Tom, and I think it's a good job Juliet was on mute, because her face when you were quoting some of those statistics was quite telling. But yeah, they're very, very hugely challenging. And of course, you know, part of the ELC commissioning its work on evaluating the performance of our own STEM activities to see how we can do better is at least sort of doing a step in the right direction. And we've obviously got the code, the STEM code that we're going to promote and be launching in the next couple of weeks as well, which all the ELC members are going to sign up to, and hopefully many, many more right across the STEM communities, employers too, because these aren't just challenges for the energy sector, they're challenges for many employers. On that note, let me invite Sinead to join us and share some thoughts now. Hi, Sinead. Oh, I think you might still be on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, no, got loud and clear, loud and clear.
There we go, thank you. All right, so good to be here. Yeah, I was thinking about what to say about our successes in this, because I do think as leaders we're very inclined to spend quite a lot of time talking about where the areas where we're not where we want to be, and so it's quite nice to make a bit of time just to talk about what is working, and I think we have had some successes in Shell in the UK, and the thing that strikes me about a lot of it is that they can be quite modest in themselves, but they're all very important, because you know we're a very large organisation, and so it's ultimately about adding up all those small, medium steps forward, avoiding any steps back, and then fundamentally driving change in our culture, and then of course in our outcomes. And I think one of the successes I definitely think from this year has been what we've learned from others, and what we've learned from others on the ELC. Yeah, we have, John may have said this earlier, we have stolen with pride, and that's been fantastic, and I think we'll continue to do that. And then I think, if I think about where we are now with 33% women in senior roles in Shell versus a decade ago where there was maybe 12 or 15%, I think that some of that success has been around just that sheer year-on-year consistency and focus on changing things, because this is a business issue, and we very much frame it that way, and where we are today has taken years, and so we know it's going to take quite a lot of years more, and it's not just around our gender representation, but the broader diversity that we want in the organisation. And so I think I'm sort of amplifying what Juliet and Alistair and others have said, which is that those sort of very, very clear ambitions around gender and diversity and indeed targets make quite a big difference. Yeah, because we know our culture as a company, and we're pretty straightforward, you know, maybe lots of engineers and scientists, but what we measure and what we focus on, it gets managed, and then we see the difference, we see this success. And one of the things that we focused on a lot over the past few years has been on our flexible working campaign, and now clearly COVID has given that a bit of a nuclear boost. But even before COVID, you know, what we saw was that by really being clear on what we support in flexible working, and really driving that message down our leadership and changing our policies and our processes to make everything easier, you definitely empower women to ask what they need to thrive in the working environment, which is massively important. But it also drove more guys to work part-time and to think differently. And I think for me, that's very much that part of a balanced organisation, is that it works for everybody. And you know, that greater clarity has helped us with that. Now COVID has, you know, transformed that in one way, because of course, you know, vast majority of our people in the UK that weren't on operational sites started working from home, and I have had some cracking conversations with leaders who sort of said never really believed in it. You know, I get that it's a modern thing, but I just like to see them in front of me 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. And I'm now saying, and I hated being at home myself. I've never worked from home, and you know, here I am a month in, and it's fantastic. Who knew? So we're seeing sort of epiphanies come in, which is fantastic, and we're also seeing that a lot more things can be done very, very differently. But of course, the other thing we're going to have to remember in all of this is COVID and the impacts of it. You know, they have landed disproportionately for in a lot of households on women, on caring responsibilities, on homeschooling, et cetera, and it's not just about being at home. You know, flexible working and working differently is about that relationship with your line manager and having a completely different mindset. So I think, you know, that's still an area where we've seen a step change. We've seen good progress. I think that progress has been accelerated, but I think there's still more to do on that sort of attitude and outlook piece. And then our returners program, for me personally, has been a massive highlight because it was sort of a great passion of mine, that there's this huge talent pool out there that for whatever reason, over whether it's, you know, in the last couple of years or actually in the last decade, have left the workplace, and often have left, you know, our sector, the energy sector, which maybe wasn't as I guess embracing to women and how they wanted to work a decade ago, and now, you know, would like to come back and don't know how. And so with returner programs, your ability to tap into that pipeline and just bring some phenomenal women, and indeed in our case some men, back into the organisation has been quite awesome, actually. And I have a lady who works on my energy transition team for the UK who came in on a 6-month returner program a few years ago, and we can't let her go, and she's fantastic. And you see more and more our thought process about where maybe some of the talent is besides the more traditional routes of securing a talent. You know, we start to change our thinking, and I think that's all again part and parcel of all that sort of small steps and changes you need to make. And then I guess the case study that you mentioned in the ELC Year 2 report, that brought, I think, probably quite a lot of the previous learnings that we've had around targets and leadership commitment and flexibility all together. And so one very inspirational female leader, you know, built a digitization and computational science center of excellence, you know, which had a level of diversity that, you know, is quite unusual for us, and kind of showed us how you can do this. So I think, you know, there are plenty of green shoots of hope. We do see that if you keep at it, you know, and you keep focusing on it, you can drive change. But I think we're under no illusions that we need to work really hard to continue on the journey to equality.
Yeah, no, that's right. And John quoted that returners statistic, which was awful, of sort of losing 75% of the talent because they did not wish to come back. Just crazy. So yeah, Alistair's mentioned the positivity in the results that they've had, and yours similarly is really, really important, not to let that tap stay on and leaky. Not helpful at all. Well, as one of the newest members of the ELC, yes, it's fantastic to have you on board. You're at the very beginning of your journey. Tell us some of your thoughts, what you're hoping for.
No, well, thanks, Louise, and thank you for including myself and me and Drax on this panel. And it's actually, the panel is already a great example of what we are getting from the ELC, which is lots of sharing of great ideas and good examples of what people are doing and what we can do as we sort of put our plans in place. And the way I think to talk a little bit about Drax, I mean, I've been the CEO for a couple of years now, and basically what I'm trying to do is build a purpose-led organization. I mean, you mentioned our purpose of enabling a zero carbon, lower cost energy future, our ambition to ultimately become carbon negative, and building a sort of an inclusive company, you know, with the right level of diversity and opportunity for all is fundamentally part of that. And if I think about the successes we may have had this year, I would say, you know, while we are at the beginning of our journey, I feel that we've made a huge amount of progress in putting in place the building blocks that will enable us to make progress over the next few years. Right? So, I mean, frankly, joining ELC was one of them. Learning some of the things that other people are doing is another piece of this. We have a clear sort of structure now for how we are managing the issue and trying to enable ourselves to become more diverse, more inclusive across a whole range of different things now. And as I said before, are at the beginning of our journey. It's a couple of key points for me. One is that it is, the whole topic is really for us, it's owned by me and my executive committee. It's something that we feel passionately about. We've had several sessions there about sort of how we want to sort of enable change at Drax. We had a great session over the summer where one of the questions that the sort of facilitator asked us is, why do you want to become more diverse, or why do you want to be an inclusive place to work? And the answer for me was quite clear. It was fundamentally because it's the right thing to do, right? And it's really a values-based thing for me and for my team, and that clearly, it will, I believe, also lead to the right business outcomes. It will also have lots of other benefits, but fundamentally, it is a sort of value-based thing, and that's where we start for the whole thing. The second thing that I've asked all my team to do is very much about role modeling, as people have mentioned already, making sure that we're all doing that. So one of the things I do, for example, is I do a weekly note. I communicate with the whole company, and I am very conscious of including my views about the importance of inclusion and diversity as part of that note. Maybe equally, if not more importantly, we are encouraging people throughout the company to share their stories about their backgrounds, their communities with the whole company, and that I think is having also already an important impact. Yeah. The other side of this for me, which is one of the things I think we are again putting the pieces in place, is that there's two ends of the spectrum in the whole question for me. One is what do you do with role modeling? What do you do with aspirational targets? Where do you put those targets? And we put a target of getting 40% of our senior leadership to be women, and we are, I would say, making slow progress there. I mean, it's probably proving more challenging than maybe we would have expected, but I think we are working hard to get to that. But the other end of the spectrum, which I think is the important thing that I think is critical for me that we measure carefully, is the actions that we are taking. Because I think the challenge with some of those longer term targets is they can feel a little bit out of reach. Whereas if we say, look, what are we going to do? Everybody get your unconscious bias training, make sure you have your interview panel or sort of short list set up the way you want them, your interview panels, the way you use language, all of these critical nuts and bolts. Someone mentioned data, making sure we have the data that we need. We're putting all of those things in place. And I think that sort of double-ended strategy, as in, what is the key sort of real process and data things that have to happen and be done correctly at the same time as having those aspirational goals. And we're actually, I think, frankly, thinking hard now about what that next aspirational goal should be. And I think that's a lot of thinking that's going on there. Maybe the final thought that I would give is that, and this is actually, I'm gonna shamelessly borrow this idea that came out of the discussion we had this morning at the ELC, which is, I think that there's a huge both risk and opportunity coming out of where we are with COVID-19 and the whole question of green recovery, the whole question of leveling up, the whole question of bouncing back. Because in the same way that governments, I think, have quickly committed to building back in a greener way, I think I'm very encouraged by what the UK government is thinking and what other governments are thinking. I think Keith Anderson made a very good point that we should be doing the same in the diversity and the inclusion sort of sphere. We should be asking people to make sure that as we hire people, as we rebuild workforces, that's done fundamentally in a new way, right? That enables some of these changes to happen, because it's a once in a obviously it's a huge challenge, but maybe it's an opportunity as we build back that we can do that in a better way, right? And I think also Juliet's comments about the impact of COVID on different types of people in different positions. I think for us it has enabled us to have more flexible working, and I think that's a positive if we can actually enable that and people are more comfortable with it. Clearly, for many people, that's just really hard, right? I mean, if you've got people you're caring for, as you mentioned, Louise. So again, thinking about how those things impact different people and that you care for those people in different ways as a company is quite important to us. Right? So very excited to be part of the group here. Looking forward to that competition. We need to get odds since we're coming a little bit back from behind in the pack, but we look forward to catching up.
Fantastic, Will. Thank you very much indeed, and I'm sure you will. Because great leadership and ambition is and measuring what we're doing, as we've been hearing from everybody, is the place to start. We are being overwhelmed with questions flying into the chat, so I'm going to have to do some quick fire stuff because we're going to be running out of time. But what I will do is commit to get some answers from anything from ELC members that we can't do in the time that we've got available, because there's only a few minutes left. The first question that's come through is asking about the percentage makeup of leadership teams, and you've heard from several of the CEOs here that they are already 50-50. And if you take a look in the report, you'll see that all of the stats for all of the ELC companies, all 14, are actually in the report. So I won't whiz around the room and get them to answer that one now. But I will say, hands up, anybody being reverse mentored by an aspiring woman in their organisation? Sinead. Sinead, would you like to just make a comment on that?
Yes, so then the question is, what are you hearing?
Yes.
And it's quite interesting. There's a couple of junior women that sort of feedback to me on a fairly regular basis. And I think what I take from what I'm hearing is that there are parts of the business where things have not changed as much as I would have liked them to change since I was a young geophysicist. There are pockets in the organization that remain quite sticky. And that many of the same challenges that I thought about and I worried about when I was in my late 20s still exist today. But what I also hear is that having a female CFO, as Rhoda Shell does, or having sort of because my leadership team at the UK level is gender balanced, having so many more role models helps. And what really women we find are asking of us is step out and talk more. How are you working? How do you manage to balance things? How do you I liked Juliet's comments, or that your partner is your glass ceiling. How do I feed into this? I have a partner who's got a really big, high-profile career. How do we manage this? So it's exactly the same questions that I asked myself. So not much has changed on that front. I think there are some sort of societal challenges in there, but what I'm hearing is that from the organizational kind of barriers that maybe I faced as a young woman, there's still some areas of issue, but overall I think women can see more of a pathway than they could see before. I do get quite a lot of challenge about why our EC isn't more gender diverse, because although we have an amazing CFO, that's only one. So that's something that comes up quite a bit. But people really like the balance that they see in the UK. And again, we're all really different. So, and I know you've come from through our careers to where we are on the board of Shell UK from very different places. And so that I think has been is very welcomed, because it gives you a sense of people like me, right? There isn't one cookie cutter woman any more than there's a cookie cutter guy for sitting at a top of house.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I got one here for you, Juliet. It says, which is the biggest challenge, reducing imposter syndrome in young female engineers or increasing senior leaders' awareness of barriers and inequalities for women in the energy sector?
I think it's both, actually. I don't think one is the other. I think there's still, I come across it from time to time, not necessarily from the industry itself directly, but I definitely come across it from peers or people I come across who think that the gender thing is fixed. You've got equal pay, that's enough. And the imposter syndrome is massive. And it's not amongst all female engineers. I think the bigger challenge I personally have, and I think Tom talked about it, is the fact that we are really struggling with having people study some of the basic sciences. And I've said this before, I think we need to go back to the drawing board on our education system. Having joint degrees, seeing more joint degrees where science and business come together, or science and management, science and communication even, because I think sort of pure physics, having been a pure physicist myself, is quite daunting as a subject, and it's not all of it is much fun. It has to be, some of it is, but and I think trying to make sciences more attractive to a broader range of people is really important. So I still think there's a load of work there to be done, but the kind of coming back to the imposter syndrome, we just got to see more people in the roles that people can imagine themselves to be. I always remember having a conversation with a senior woman who said, I don't want to be my boss because that person went to a lot of dinners and never went home. And I think it's, how do we make sure we get, as Sinead was saying, that visibility about how you overcome some of the challenges of living a balanced life, and that should be for men and women, to be honest. It's not just on women.
Absolutely, and we shouldn't be apologising or be embarrassed about demonstrating that flexibility and being really visible about it. I think that's something that we've all got to get over, men and women. So you kind of answered question 4 there too for me. Thank you very much. We talked about whether or not role models were a positive thing. Yes, the answer is yes, and yes, we should encourage and see more of those. Alistair, there's one I'd like to throw to you very quickly, if I may, because we are running short of time. But it's interesting, this point from junior talent saying, should we be worried because of this virtual and remote way in which we're working and we're not face to face, so we're less visible? And you know, does that then put us at a disadvantage with our senior leaders and managers? Which is a really interesting question, I think. What are your thoughts?
I'd love to say I didn't have any concerns, but I do. I think you know, for us, I think it's important for us to start looking at trying to get people back into the office. I think it's important for junior people to see how senior people work, even if they decide they don't like what I'm doing and they think I'm never ever going to do that. Basically, I think that helps, and I think one of our critical things, if we look at collaboration, creativity, and then development of younger people, sort of onboarding somebody, you know, who joined 4 or 5 months ago and is and doing that solely via this kind of medium, I think is very difficult. And obviously social distancing and you know, avoiding too much contact is all around not seeing so many people, and therefore you don't see so many of the junior people who might be brilliant and have great ideas, and nor do they see so many of the senior people or the old people who are going to get it sicker and iller than this because of this, and so I do think that is a concern and something that we have to try and address by, I think, getting people at all levels back into the office at times. And I think the question there just raises the point with me about whether we need to try and make special effort to do more with shadow boards, junior talent, and things of that nature with senior people, so that we're forcing some of that interaction to happen when we're all concerned about what we're going to do on COP26 or green recovery, or you know, the CMA inquiry into water and all the rest of it. We're all going to put our heads together. How do we get that more junior and diverse talent into the room on some of those discussions? So I think it is a big issue. It's probably not there yet. It will become a bigger and bigger issue the longer this sort of lockdown and these sort of exclusions go on, in my view. So it would be a concern for me.
Thank you. And final word from Tom and Will. The final questions is essentially, in short, it says, are the jobs in the energy sector still designed for men and too male in the way that they are presented and produced? Tom, a quick comment from you, and then Will.
I think, unfortunately, yes. And I think it's something we're all working on to get rid of those systemic things. But there are some systemic things. I mean, the one that always gets talked about is offshore wind, and you know, no female toilets on an offshore wind turbine. I mean, it sounds stupid, but it is kind of easier for a bloke to sort himself out in that situation, right? But there's some systemic stuff, and I think we talked about the education side and not getting the STEM, but there's also stuff like the support. Like, you know, we all rely on our partners for support. When you go away, a lot of our workers are away from home a lot of the time, yeah, and that, from a societal perspective, somehow feels more accepted for the male to go away Monday to Friday and not so much accepted. So yeah, I think unfortunately there is, and that's part of the challenge for us to resolve some of that.
Yeah, and Will, final word?
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add to that, well, two thoughts. One is that we need to make sure that when we present jobs that might traditionally have been perceived as male jobs, that we don't continue misperception which might not be real. The other thing is that there are many parts of our company and our industry that are not classically sort of male jobs, right? I mean, we have lots of people working in our supply business, much more gender balance, and there's lots of opportunities to grow in those parts of the business, and we need to make sure, A, that we are giving those people of all types the right kind of opportunities, and those people also grow into leadership positions within the company.
Absolutely. So plenty of work for us yet to do, I think. Ladies and gentlemen from the Energy Leaders Coalition, thank you very much for giving up your time this morning and sharing some of your successes and some of the things that you see looking ahead as the challenges. Delegates have got about 4 minutes, thanks to my tardy timekeeping, to rush to the tea station and back again before we switch over and welcome Jonathan Cole as our next speaker here at noon. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Bye for now, and thanks very much for your participation. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.